we've all watched the 80s and 90s movies. Robots should be here by now. But we realize that there's this entire category of low-cost robots that have to be explored and built at volume so that you can actually aggregate them into swarms.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. Today I'm speaking with Stephen Houghton, CEO and co-founder of Swarmbotics AI, a low-cost swarm robotics company serving the industrial and defense sectors. Stephen, thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk about the defense industrial base, so this should be fun.
Love it. Thanks so much. So you've had a career across various, high-profile organizations, and now you're leading Swarmbotics AI. Can you share a little bit with us on what motivated you to co-found Swarmbotics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been interested in entrepreneurship. I've kind of jumped from a few different types of startups in the past. And most recently, I've been in ground autonomy for the last 8 years. So I've been an exec at Cruise, which is General Motors' business unit for autonomous vehicles, and spent some time at Amazon, AWS, and then Embark. And so really got a foundation there. But Embark was acquired by Applied Intuition last summer. And so I got together with my co-founder, Drew Watson, and we started chatting about where we saw opportunities in robotics. And it became this glaring hole that we weren't seeing robots in a while at the volumes that we thought. I mean, we've all watched the 80s and 90s movies. Robots should be here by now. But we realized that there's this entire category of low-cost robots that have to be explored and built at volume so that you can actually aggregate them into swarms. And so most of the investment in robots on the ground side has been in these use cases that are focused on really expensive platforms. So if you have $1 million robot, you can't aggregate them into swarms very easily. And then the other thing we realized was that most of the investment in time and effort has gone into autonomy on the ground side that has to be nearly perfect to be deployed. So if you're driving on the freeway, with a heavy 18-wheeler, the autonomy has to be perfect. You can't mess up. And the reality is that ground autonomy is very hard. And there are all these opportunities for doing some amount of autonomy to really help. And so we saw all these different use cases for the warfighter. And then frankly, the Replicator initiative dropped while we were looking at business initiatives and realized that there is this alignment on the defense side for what we were thinking about doing. And so it's just a great time to start a company in this space.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure what an amazing experience to work with those companies leading some of those initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun. It's an exciting place to be in autonomy.
Yeah, it's so cool. I just think of this. I've got some family members that have Teslas, and it doesn't always work. The self-driving mode it's hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like if it works 98% of the time in a Tesla, that's not enough, right? Like you can't completely take your eyes off the wheel, you get in trouble. So that's almost exactly what we were looking at, is that it has to be perfect for some of those cases. And so there's all these other opportunities that you can actually do robots in the wild now in a less than perfect environment.
That's great. So you also, looking at your background there, you are a fellow veteran and Marine. Can you tell me, and current officer, can you share a little bit about, your Marine career and how that's helped shape and given you perspectives into this journey, both from, executive time as well as founding this company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got my commission in 2001, joined right before September 11th. So it was a pretty fascinating time to be in the military and seeing all the transformation from before and after 9/11. But I was an intelligence officer. I deployed to Iraq for the initial invasion in 2003. Went back on the 15th MEU a little over a year later and split that deployment between going back into Iraq and then also, if you remember the Asian tsunami in 2004, my team was the first into Sri Lanka, Indonesia.
Holy cow.
Which was tragic and just an unbelievable devastation to witness. So that was my active time. I actually left active duty, went to grad school and started into business and took 10 years off, a little more than 10 years. And so then I rejoined the reserves about 9 years ago, and I'm still in the reserves and as a Marine officer, currently with Force Headquarters Group at Mark Orus.
Fantastic. And so through that time, leadership lessons, founding a company, what would you say the skill sets that you brought forward most apply or you've been able to leverage in unique ways compared to non-military background founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, a couple things. I think leadership skills, there's no better place to learn it than the military for obvious reasons. I think that there are also some kind of fun things that come from the military where you can always reset your baseline. So if things are bad, they can always get worse. And I think you realize that, it's certainly a lesson for the Marine Corps. So it allows them to keep perspective on, truly life and death situations versus things that are annoying that you're just going to have to work through. And I think it's just kind of persistence. I think the whole military experience, starting at, boot camp or officer candidate school is designed and gets you to grind through resistance and friction. And frankly, the entrepreneurial journey is very much about that.
The life of a founder is beat down. Yeah, beat down.
It really is.
That's great. Well, thank you for your service. That's fantastic.
Same to you.
So as an entrepreneur and founder, what is the most exciting and challenging aspect of working, as you're creating this, working in the defense industrial base?
Yeah, I think from an excitement perspective, there's starting to be this kind of grassroots recognition that we have gotten our eye off of the 8-ball when it comes to the defense industrial base. And so I think there are a lot of great stakeholders that are starting to pay more attention and to invest resources and really help make up for what is, in my opinion, been decades of America eroding the industrial base, I'd say largely based off of the globalization macroeconomic factors. But what I think is really exciting is that there are people that are willing to invest in this. They see the strategic issues. And then there's all of this great talent that's willing to go and build businesses and to start to improve and address some of these shortfalls. So I think from that exciting side, that's definitely, it's a fun place to be in. I think from the challenging side, it's just that you're starting a little bit behind, right? That erosion has led to a loss of capabilities. So as you're thinking about things like sourcing components from American supply chain, it's more difficult. And even if you find them, they tend to be more expensive because they're not being subsidized by other governments. So, your product ends up being more expensive and it's more difficult from a, competitive position.
It's definitely an interesting time. But I love all the initiatives, the different SBIR grants and things to help companies, as well as, to your point, the VCs are starting to pay attention to if you need to take capital. So that's definitely a good time to be doing it. So tell me about Swarmbotics AI. Like, what are you doing? What are your use cases as you move forward?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, at the most basic level, we're building ground robot swarms. So unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs. I think the wrinkle that we're trying to focus on is making these attritable or low cost to where if you lose them, it's not going to ruin your day. And I think when you do that, you unlock this category of capabilities from swarms. So we're creating these attritable, swarmable UGVs for defense. And to your question on use cases, when you think about what groups of robots can do, there are a ton of different possibilities. And so a couple of those use cases would be just resupply, as particularly the contested logistics environment, as our planners are trying to grapple with the loss of air-enabled superiority and what those implications are on our supply chain. But ISR missions, airfield operations, electronic warfare, counter UAS, kinetic, all of these things could be put into a payload on a robot, pushed forward from the troops to then protect, American service members and allies. And so lots of really fascinating ways that you can apply that ground mobility, autonomy, and swarmable software to defense use cases.
And a mission that matters.
That's right. Yeah, that helps too. It helps you get out of bed in the morning, get excited about what you're doing.
Well, it's so exciting. I mean, we have a similar, mission-focused company, but, giving something to care about that's much more than just I log my time and my dollars.
That's right.
Having a mission that matters. That's great. So are there commercial applications that you see useful? What would those be?
Yeah, for sure. We are definitely focused on defense first, but if you think about anything that you need to move goods and, the 3Ds of robotics of dull, dirty, dangerous, I think come out. And so if you have things that you need to do that are monotonous, that you need to drive miles and you just don't want to have a person that's doing it. So you could think about, ranches, farms, kind of port operations, these expansive operations where you don't really want to have a person doing this mundane task, to dangerous, think about, search and rescue or wildfire or things like that, where you could actually send in a robot to do resupply or pickup or, sensing, things like that. So lots of different commercial use cases as well that we see in the future. And it's, particularly exciting when you get the price point down low enough that you can unlock those different commercial use cases.
So I'm not super familiar with how to do this, but what are the key technologies? Like where are the fundamental breakthroughs that, differentiate how and what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a very quick overview on the autonomy side is that you've got this amazing computer that's kind of reproducing what we do as humans, from the perceiving what's going on in the environment. So perception through a variety of different sensors, whether it's LiDAR, camera, radar, whatever it is, the robot kind of understanding what's happening in the world around it, to then interpreting that information into planning and saying, okay, I see this thing here. This is how I need to react. And then going to controls and saying, okay, this is my plan. Now I need to actually execute it. So if you think about it from a basic perspective, if you're driving a car, the controls would be the steering wheel, the brakes, and the actuators. And so you have to go through that entire process from a ground autonomy perspective, and then be able to communicate to the rest of the swarm when you extrapolate it into these groups of robots. And so there's all kinds of really novel ways that engineers do amazing things to get those to work. A lot of those leverage AI, ML, and so different parts of the software stack, you'll see those show up, which is really exciting. And I think when you add in the layer of low cost, you're trying to get the absolute most out of these inexpensive sensors. Because if you create $1 million robot, you can't go and blow it up. And so there are some pretty fascinating techniques that we're using there to be able to really get as much blood out of that stone as we can.
I mean, isn't that part of the problem? You think of trying to make it cheap. It's usually not the vehicle itself that's inexpensive. It's the payloads. Are you developing the vehicles, its ability to swarm, as well as the payloads?
Yeah, you're definitely right on that. I think you can get commercial off the shelf, base mobility platforms much more easily than you can get affordable sensor suites. And then it's further complicated by the fact that, when you're servicing the defense market, you have to be careful about where your supply chain's coming from. Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of get down into that filtration, you get into a pretty expensive set of parts if you're not careful. And so we spend a lot of time being very judicious in how we select those. And then to answer your question on whether we're building it, I think we'd be happy to host other swarms of robots. The reality is that there aren't people that are really building these yet. And so for now, we're not building like the base platform. We're using COTS, commercial off-the-shelf technology, as much as possible. But we are doing some interesting things to integrate those into the overall system so that we can create those swarms of robots.
Cool. So ANT system, you've got a system called ANTS.
Yep.
How does that enhance, the operational capabilities, for our nation?
With your military background, that you have to come up with a catchy acronym for whatever it is you're doing. That's where that came from. So ANTS stands for Attritable Network Tactical Swarm. And so what we tried to get in there was this very clear implication that this is not an extremely exquisite, expensive system, and that it is built from the beginning to swarm. And so the specific thing that we're trying to get at there is the ability to aggregate these sleeted robots and to use affordable mass and then unlock some of these other swarm capabilities in order to lighten a load on the warfighter and to get humans out of dangerous situations, but also add new capabilities that may not have existed before that robots can provide.
And in order to scale this, is that challenging in these environments?
It is. I think, from the perspective of the industrial base, right, there's a down select in terms of the number of suppliers that you can use and the expense that you can stomach, I guess, for some of these sensors. But the other thing that's just, challenging is, on the military side, the interoperability, right? There's this proliferation of platforms and systems, and being able to integrate with the different radios and the different software suites is something that is a challenge.
And so is you're deploying these, like what size of, these swarms are there? Is it, 3 considered a swarm, or do you have to be north of 10? And are they all individually doing something different, or is it generally kind of one logic flow that,
Yeah, great question. So I think the most liberal answer there is we consider a swarm to just be a group of robots that are working together. So small swarms, less than 10. What we are excited about is the future where you've got hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of these. And so maybe one thing that I could bring up here is that we think of the command and control from both a top-down and a bottom-up perspective. So if you imagine a bottom-up perspective, you're a warfighter, you see a robot, and you need to be able to take control of the robot and tell it what to do. You can, pick up your phone, scan a QR code, and then send that robot to go do what you need it to do. That is less on the swarm side. The exciting part of the swarm side is we're doing top-down. And imagine you're at higher headquarters and you say, hey, I need to send 15 ants to go to the point of friction that are standing by for, medevac, or, hey, we need to resupply this battalion that's out in the field. Send 20 ants that direction. We've lost some EW capability. Let's send the backup EW capability out there. And you can do some things much more effectively, from the higher headquarters, but you also still need that capability, the front line. You want to empower your commanders to be able to have that decentralized decision making. So it's kind of this balance of creating the C2 control for the swarms.
So are you helping to find that, or is this more you're creating capability sets that your customer can then, pivot back and forth?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think this is an area that is really transitioning from an academic realm where there have been interesting papers. But if you think about on the ground side, nobody's building groups of ground robots yet. And so it's kind of greenfield territory where we're going to be able to take some of those assumptions and, have our PhDs that have written their dissertations on this actually go to the field and say, okay, does this work? Does this not? Is this as important as other things? And so I think there's a lot of learning that's going to come in at a very fast amount of time here in the next couple of years.
Well, the Air Force is on the CCA program that they're talking about, which is, aircraft that are unmanned, that are, similar idea, whether it's swarming or a couple, and, the conversations of how to deploy those and employ those, the capability sets they bring. Is there much collaboration? I would think there's uniqueness between, it's a different domain, but it's very similar.
Yeah, I think that, the human machine teaming, that collaboration between the robots and the human operator is pretty critical. Everybody's scared of kind of a Skynet type situation where the robots are making decisions on their own. And so you got to keep the human in the loop for, critical decision making. And I think the secret is having the robots do what the robots do really well and having the humans do what the humans do really well. And so robots don't get distracted. They don't get tired. They don't get hungry. They're able to, stay focused. And so there's some things that they can do really well, and they're attritable, right? You'd much rather send a robot down range than a person into a dangerous environment, but they're not as good maybe on the strategy or the decision-making or the problem solving. And so figuring out how you get that interface between the robots to provide that extra capability to the humans is really what we're focusing on, kind of from the ground up here.
When you say attritable, so in some of the air, my background's more on the air side. When you launch it, it's done. Like, it's not coming back. I would imagine the ground, is that your intention? Or you're just saying it's cheap enough that if it gets destroyed or taken out, it's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating part that I think is going to be changing dramatically in the future, because you want to get to a place where you change the concept of deployment by moving these robots out there. So that means that you have to release that responsibility from the commander for having something, get blown up. And so in the Marine Corps, we have something called a CMR, and that's, as a commander, you sign for that. And then you're responsible for all that equipment, and it's really serious if you lose something. And it's a lot of red tape to get through. We want these robots to be south of that, right? Maybe somewhere in the expendable range. So, if you fire off ammunition, you don't have to account for every single one of those at all times. It's expected that you're going to be losing those. And that's really where we see this magic coming from the attritable swarms. I mean, think about like the military deception applications of being able to send a group of robots out to the flank and just saying, yeah, we know they're going to get blown up, but it's going to serve the higher purpose.
I mean, I think it's fantastic. Are your vehicles that you're using, are they like air drones, or are they more ground, literally, little robot RC cars?
Yeah, it's all ground. And so we've got two different sizes that we're building. So one of them is a quad size ATV that can carry about 500-pound payload. And as a trailer hitch, you can pull a trailer. And then we're doing a much smaller one that's kind of man-portable, kind of 40 pounds, that you can actually work together with the larger one in kind of a marsupial way, where the large one can go in and drop off the smaller ones that have, less range and less power.
I mean, it seems like this technology, both, from an underwater or on water type of capability, as well as the low altitude drones. Do you see those converging at some point? Does that technology apply to all those domains, or is it really ground is just a different animal?
I think that largely it does apply to most of the domains. I think there are nuances with each of the domains. Some may rely more on LiDAR, some are moving faster, some have less complicated environments to navigate in the air, for example. I mean, underwater has a whole set of things that you don't have to deal with in other domains. But I think what you were kind of poking at a little bit, which I think is fascinating, is this future world of cross-platform autonomy. So you can imagine you have a contested logistics problem where you can't move many things into this environment. You don't want to send your capital ships in. You can send in a UUV that has a UGV on it. So a submersible that goes, beaches itself, UGVs roll off, are able to resupply. They can set up, counter UAS or EW. And so when you start to combine those different types of robots, I think it gets pretty exciting too.
So much growth and just innovation in thinking how to best do that. That's exciting. So how, I imagine one of the problems you have or will is to deal with is the security and cyber resilience of anything that is unmanned, right? Someone might be able to jump into the system, take control, or gain intelligence from it. How do you work with that? How does Swarmbotics handle that challenge right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think based off of the time I've spent in self-driving cars and trucks, cybersecurity is a huge threat. It's something we take real seriously. So one of the things that we have learned along the way is that you really have to think at the beginning about how you're going to do the architecture for the product security, because it can be very difficult to go back and make those changes. And so we're working very closely with our customers to understand what their cyber requirements are for the individual platforms and use cases, and then really not only make them compliant, but try to exceed those requirements when practical to make ants cyber resilient. And I think it's a continuum, right? You can spend so much cyber hardening that it actually eclipses the cost of value of the system. And so you've got to figure out what the appropriate range is there.
Yeah, sometimes in pursuit of perfection, you miss the boat. Yeah, it's a tough challenge because there's a lot of interesting technology looking to exploit that.
Absolutely.
That's exciting stuff. I love what you're doing. That is just, there's so many things you could do.
It just boggles the mind how many capabilities, like putting a robotic arm on the back of this, right? To lift like artillery shells, right? Like these loaders. And I mean, it's just insane the different things that we can do once we actually crack the autonomy nut. So it's a fun place to be right now.
Yeah, I'm just saying, to your point, South China Sea, the ability to take something underwater, get out, have, one of your vehicles and deploy, right there. You could put a SAM system, on there, on that side.
Absolutely.
Some sort of cyber, it's just so many cool things that you could never do with people. It would just be, the risk would be way too high.
Yeah. One of the cool things about the swarms to me is that it's basically this network of nodes that can transmit information to. So like from a perception perspective, you get this much better battlefield awareness at like a granular level in different spectrums and different things that you're looking for.
So if you were to look at, other entrepreneurs, I mean, you have a great background, but someone wants to get involved in starting a company in the defense industrial base, generally easier if you start on the commercial application, you get a product, show product market fit, and then transfer it over. But if you're just going straight to the DIB, which it sounds like, you are, what recommendations or lessons learned have you gained along the way that you would share?
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably two parts. There's kind of the step back, high level entrepreneur, and everybody says it's a grind and you got to get ready for the grind, but it's something you don't quite understand until you actually go through it. And so I like to think about it as when you're willing something into existence, it requires so much energy. And then you have to be able to move on from setbacks. And if you're not good at that, if it drains you too much, it's a pretty tough place to be an entrepreneur. So that's kind of the high level advice. I think from the defense industrial base perspective, I think it's a really good time to do this. I think that you're seeing a lot of tailwinds. I think there's this recognition that it's a critical capability that we have let atrophy for too long. And it's so important that people are kind of collaborating to make sure that we've got the right resources and world-class talent that are working on it. So I'd say if you see a big gap and you get the energy to address it, jump in. America needs it.
And it does take energy, a lot of it.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. So looking forward, if you were to chart out, what are the big milestones for Swarmbotics in the next, 2 years? And then what are you charting for, 5 to 10 years down the road?
One of the things that's fascinating about this is the technology is evolving so quickly that you just can't even conceive of all of the permutations right now. So I know that what I'm imagining is going to be adjusted and modified. And if you watch the Russia-Ukraine battlefield right now, the number of unmanned systems that are being deployed is mind-boggling. And so it's very clear where this is going to go. But what I get excited about is thinking about this 3 to 5 year time horizon where you've got tens of thousands of heterogeneous robots. So robots that are doing different tasks, that are out working collaboratively with the human operators. I think if you think about like a defense, right, or a military unit, you think of these concentric rings of robot capabilities that you can deploy. You can imagine, moving from the warfighter where you're protecting them, you move out these concentric rings where you've got, ISR capabilities that are just providing battlefield awareness. You've got counter UAS, which is a terrifying thing right now. If you're watching this Russia and Ukraine, being on the ground in the future is going to be it's going to be sporty. But, a ring of electronic warfare, of, anti-vehicle, kinetic applications. And then you start getting, into where you're doing ground resupply, medevac, and things like that. And so all of those robots working in concert together in the future is a vision that we're very, very excited about contributing to.
I want to pull a couple of those threads. As an air superiority guy, we hadn't lost no U.S. soldiers or, airmen, Marines have been lost from an air attack since the Korean War until, a couple months ago when we lost it to drones.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh my goodness. So that is terrifying because it's a unique challenge.
It is. And, as a military planner, you worry about if you're fighting the last to work, and in a lot of ways, we have learned a lot of painful lessons in Iraq and Afghanistan, but if you look at the future threat, the contested logistics, the loss of air and naval superiority, it's a different fight. And so there's a lot of, stress on those planners to try to figure out how to adapt to it right now.
So as a CEO day-to-day, what does your day-to-day look like? As a founder, still up and coming company, like how do you split your time?
It's kind of all over the place. So it is, you're at that phase where you are in the middle of engineering, you're doing, product reviews, you're trying to help load the sprints from an agile perspective, you're interviewing like crazy, you're talking to investors, you're talking to customers. That's probably the thing that I do the most. And then you're doing things like, taxes and, trying to do cash management and all of the things that you don't have sufficient scale to have a person doing. You're doing it as the CEO. Right. So I try to protect my engineers so that they can focus on what matters, and I just kind of do everything else.
Yeah, because I was pointing to, like, just even following the, Ukraine conflict, how do you get that information? How do you, how are you getting the learnings, and how do you find time to actually take that step back, synthesize it into a strategy, and then execute?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I've got a couple of things that I listen to and read. The Institute of Study of War, I think, is a great daily summary of both Israel, Hamas, and then also the Ukraine, Russia. And so I track that one very closely. And then there are a bunch of newsletters like, Andrew Glenn, I think, puts a really nice one out. And so I read that pretty religiously. And then, listen to podcasts and take recommendations from other luminaries in the field. So there's a lot of great content that's being produced out there. And really, it's as you said, the trick is figuring out how you can devote the time to do it. But I think you have to. Well,
especially with that, and the tech changing so fast, both the capability sets are pulling tech from commercial off the shelf, cell phones. How do you use a collection of cell phones, for example, to do something, but from a sensor base? But, how do you stay up with the tech? AI is changing so fast. The ability to develop in the cloud was a big capability. And, is that a challenge? Are you able to do that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're watching, new sensors come out and constantly, doing trade studies to figure out what is the right combination from a, price performance combination. But it's fascinating watching things like generative AI, artificial general intelligence, and seeing, okay, what do these new innovations mean? How could we work in kind of visual LLM or other technologies in order to make these robots more effective? And as we continue to grow, it's exciting to see how these new technologies are going to be applied.
Does your customer help drive some of that, like give you awareness of that? Or
Certainly they'll, I think from the awareness perspective, we're largely getting that from our engineers on our side and doing that. But certainly some things definitely come from the customer and say, hey, have you thought about this? And so if we haven't, then we go and look into it. But it's definitely a collaborative process.
Yeah, that's great. From a culture standpoint within your organization, how do you find, because that's important, military, we bring, there's always a culture, but it's almost, driven to you, and commanders have unique capabilities to adjust to. But as a founder, you own it. How have you tried to set up your company for, near-term and long-term cultural success?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is, as you progress, it's a colonel in the Air Force, right? You've been through professional military education, and you go to command and staff college and all of these places that help you fine tune your leadership approach. But, thinking critically around command and staff, you think about kind of your leadership philosophy. And so I took that pretty seriously. I actually wrote a document that is a README for new people to understand kind of my style on how to get up to speed more quickly. And that's kind of a cheat code that we give out there, but it's, lists the attributes that I value highly. And then, so that's kind of one thing, is kind of, seeding people with the knowledge. I think some of the most important things that I can do is telling people what not to do in order to keep people focused. And so trying to chart that course from a strategy perspective and making sure that we have economy of efforts and only working on the things that really matter. That is huge. And then it's just out there and trying to make sure that I understand the customer and that I'm, providing that connection between the team and the customer.
Well, that's great. Well, it's definitely super exciting time and super exciting company. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with me and the listeners. And if they want to watch the progress that you're making with Swarmbotics, how's the best way to get the latest updates and follow?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're pretty low profile by nature right now, but www.swarmbotics.ai is a great place to see where we are posting some of our new content as we grow the product and the prototypes and really crack into some of those swarm capabilities.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you at your soft week.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we'll hopefully grab a beer there. But other than that, let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Good.